of the reports today from your favorite outlets, speaking of press, the information, are that DeepSeek has been finding some of these banned NVIDIA chips and working their way to them via who knows where, the Middle East, who knows?
Look, that story's been around forever. That's what I call an evergreen. You know what? I remember once when I was at the LA Herald Examiner, I said I have nothing to write. The guy said, DA probes rockets, okay? You just can put that story out. You can say it. It can't be denied. Jensen Huang won't deny it. I will tell you this. The Chinese are going to be voracious users of these chips, and people who think they're not, let me just tell you something. Why don't you put your money where your mouth is and short the darn thing? Good luck.
Here's a look at that story at the Journal today. As we continue to look at how this process would go if H200s made their way to China and whether or not they'd be bought.
Look, I think these are the equivalent of a lot of the previous generation of the Hopper chips. I think that they're going to be in great demand, as Hopper chips are in this country. They do not have the Blackwell. I think they'll be happy to have these because, again, what people have to understand is that you want to be able to have the right hardware for training so you can build inference on it. I think that will happen. If you go back 6 months ago, if you had heard that NVIDIA was going to get this, you might take the stock up maybe to 210. Now there's a belief that everything's going to slow down. I don't see it. I think that the president's surtax is going to be assurance that they're going to accelerate. Now, why don't people believe this? For the same reason that no one has believed that Jensen Huang could ever build this company into a $1 trillion company, let alone a $5 trillion. Doubted all the way. Doubted all the way. Continues to be doubted. Media, analysts, wrong.
Yeah, you talked about the media doubting NVIDIA this whole time.
Well, I mean, I think that the stories, I remember when Jensen Huang was supposed to get a subpoena from the Justice Department. I had to come out here and say, you know what, that is untrue. I remember that we were going to say that they were going to miss the quarter multiple times because of people who were going to use other chips. It turned out to be untrue. The AMD story that AMD was faster than they were, untrue. So, I mean, what am I supposed to do other than just say, you know, he's the king? And when you shoot the king, you better kill the king. And these guys don't have the ammo. Right. You know, again, I'm circling back to NVIDIA. You can accuse me of being NVIDIA-focused, but when you get the next chip, when you get the Bureau Rubin, you're going to be able to run basically live action video if you want to. So if you want to put anything on Instagram, it'll be better than anything linear like that. Not that it isn't better now, but if you can basically run a commercial, you can probably shut it down if you want a commercial. He'll give it to you. I don't know why anyone would do anything other than split their ad budget between YouTube and Meta. That's it. ABC and NBC. Boom. That's all they have. It's two channels.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about data centers because you and I sat down in September, and at that time you said one of the biggest challenges as it pertains to data centers and the AI infrastructure build-out is that there's actually not enough dollars to fund the pipeline of deals that need to be done. How would you characterize the supply and demand dynamic as it stands now, especially as bubble fears have become an even bigger part of the conversation?
Yeah, back to your private credit, the question that there's a similar type of anxiety about the data center build and CapEx, and I don't really see it. So if you zoom out and you look at the demand for data and the demand for data centers, it makes perfect sense just given the digitization of everything. And we are years away from the demand overwhelming supply. When we think about this business, you can just look at the large hyperscalers alone, and you have $300 billion of CapEx demand this year to help support the growth in digital infrastructure and data consumption. That's a lot of capital in a market that's also seeing growth in the real world economy. And so my comment that I made to you the last time we were together stands, which is we're not in a bubble. We're actually in an undercapitalized market that is scrambling to keep up with the demand.
So is it a mistake then for the U.S. to be able to sell NVIDIA's H200 AI chips to China?
Well, that's a different story altogether. But on that particular point, one thing to keep in mind is that while we do want to constrain China in terms of access to hardware, we also have to be mindful of the Chinese chip companies. More Threads is a Chinese chip company that just went public. The IPO was a big success there. And in fact, the founder of DeepSeek was one of the big winners and investors in that company. There's an ecosystem there that is now betting on domestic Chinese chip firms such as Huawei, More Threads, Cambricon, and others to win in that game. So we want to also make sure that we in the U.S. with our firms like NVIDIA and others have a level playing field to access all markets around the world. So there's definitely a balance there.
New reporting that China is accelerating efforts to boost domestic AI chips, even as the president is easing NVIDIA export restrictions. In today's Tech Check, Deirdre Bosa digs into what more NVIDIA chips could mean for China's tech giants. Morning, Dee.
Hey, morning, Carl. So DeepSeek, yes, it's reportedly training on smuggled Blackwells. Meanwhile, ByteDance and Alibaba, Reuters says, immediately asked for H200 orders as soon as Trump reopened the window. Now, this all exposes how far behind China's domestic chip sector still is. It also forces Beijing into a three-way trade-off that it can't win. Letting companies buy NVIDIA chips, that hurts momentum behind Beijing's domestic chip champions that, by the way, are now worth nearly $300 billion in market cap. On the other hand, blocking them slows its own tech giants and weakens China's best AI models. Third option, looking the other way while companies keep using gray market chips, that means giving up regulatory control altogether. So whichever way it turns, Beijing loses leverage. Now, the policy itself, it doesn't supercharge China's AI sector. It formalizes the dependence that already existed in the shadows, dependence that DeepSeek and others have already been exploiting. And instead of breaking from U.S. hardware, Chinese AI labs, they end up even more tied to NVIDIA's roadmap, stuck at whatever generation Washington is allowing. Now, TrendForce, an industry research firm cited by analysts, it predicted that China's high-end chip market would grow by over 60% next year, reaching about 50% market share. But that projection was built during a ban on U.S. chips. This reopening, that could change the equation and threatens all of that artificial demand that Beijing has spent years propping up. That's why, guys, this is not the strategic loss that some critics and China hawks, lawmakers, that they claim. Legal access doesn't actually narrow the gap. It just narrows China's options, and it keeps the ceiling on progress in U.S. hands, guys.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many questions. There's the geopolitical question, and then, Deirdre, there's the technology question, which you have. And that sort of lends credence to the idea, we were talking to Jack Hidary last hour about, we'll let them build off the U.S. stack so that we can kind of know what's going on there and be more in control. And then they won't do it themselves, and it'll be more of a black box.
And that's key, right? It's all about control, because we know that they were going to do it anyways. Even the first DeepSeek model that made all those headlines at the beginning of this year, you know, there's a lot of speculation that they were able to smuggle a bunch of NVIDIA chips to get there. So what this does is just kind of put Beijing in a real bind. Everywhere they turn, they're kind of losing. And remember, too, that for years they've been trying to build up their domestic chip makers that are far from the technology capable of the U.S. chip makers. So this really forces Beijing into a corner. The chip makers were going to do this regardless. Now it forces Beijing to choose who can and who isn't able to use these NVIDIA chips. And he uses the domestic accelerators, which, you know, end of the day, nobody actually wants to use. That puts this very clearly in focus.
Okay, Deirdre, thank you. For more on those smuggled NVIDIA chips that Deirdre mentioned and how China got them, let's bring in Eamon Jabbers from Washington on that angle of the story. Eamon.
Hey there, Sarah. As you just heard, a lot of interest today in these reports that Chinese companies are already using high-powered NVIDIA chips, even before President Trump's decision to allow those chips to be sent to China. And we learned new details this week about how Chinese agents inside the United States have been smuggling the high-tech chips from warehouses in New Jersey to companies in China. A criminal complaint that was unsealed on Monday reveals how one such effort allegedly worked. Now, the government says that companies in Hong Kong and Shenzhen used an elaborate network of straw buyers and cutouts to buy chips from NVIDIA in the United States and then falsely relabel them as different products from a fake company for illegal export. And the government says that as far back as in May, an undercover agent penetrated a warehouse in Secaucus, New Jersey, where a team of Chinese agents were busily swapping out the labels on NVIDIA chips before shipping them out of the country. Now, in this picture here that was unsealed by the U.S. government, you can see it's upside down here, but you can see the actual NVIDIA units and the label for the fake company that they called Sandcase. Pay-In, which the DOJ says is a company that most likely does not exist at all. Now, the government said the operation allegedly involved a network of fake companies, at least one Chinese engineer who entered the country illegally from Mexico at a border crossing near McAllen, Texas, and a series of encrypted chats in Mandarin involving conspirators in the United States and also apparently back in China. Now, the government says agents recovered at least $30 million worth of export-controlled GPUs and other items from that warehouse in New Jersey, but it seems reasonable for us to suspect that this operation alone would have been able to ship a lot more than that to China before it was busted, guys. Back over to you.
Eamon, it goes to the point that if this kind of thing can be happening in Secaucus, you can imagine what it might look like in Malaysia or Indonesia or anywhere offshore China, where a lot of these models reportedly are being built.
Yeah. And, to get the stuff from the United States to China, obviously complicated because there's export regulations here around the world. Those regulations might be even more lax, as you say. And so you can only imagine how easy that would be. I've also talked to U.S. intelligence figures over the past couple of years, Carl, who say that one of their big concerns is data centers in the Middle East using NVIDIA chips legally and then just selling data center time to companies in China. So the companies in China having access to that compute power through the Middle East without even ever getting a hold physically of those chips. They still get the benefit of it.
That's exactly what you brought up earlier, Carl.
With Emily.
About because we do sell to the Middle East and we have partnerships with all of those companies on AI. Eamon, thank you.
All right, I hope you're all doing well today and staying calm in this market. We have a lot of NVIDIA news to cover. To start things off, we got 2 articles from the information today. I want to preface by saying that I'm always hesitant to believe anything that the information reports having to do with NVIDIA rumors given their track record, but I'm bringing these stories to your attention so that you're aware of what's going on. The first story from the information claims that Chinese regulators convened emergency meetings with major tech firms such as Alibaba, ByteDance, and Tencent to decide whether they should be allowed to purchase NVIDIA's H200. Make no mistake, these companies absolutely want access to NVIDIA's chips. Now the question is whether the government will allow it. Interestingly, Reuters published an article today saying that their review of 100 tenders and academic papers show that NVIDIA's H200 is already being supplied to Chinese customers through the gray market. Along that same vein, the information published a second article today claiming that DeepSeek is using NVIDIA Blackwell chips that were smuggled into China via other countries. The report claims that the chips were installed in data centers in those other countries before being dismantled and shipped to China. We already know that DeepSeek has many NVIDIA Hopper GPUs, as we learned earlier this year. But Blackwell is another question. And it's important to note that a Blackwell NVL72 system is much, much larger than just a Blackwell GPU. I'm hesitant to believe that they would be able to secretly smuggle massive Blackwell systems in meaningful quantities, but of course I could be wrong about that. As I said, I'm always hesitant to believe anything the information reports regarding NVIDIA rumors given their track record. Following the information's article about DeepSeek, NVIDIA responded to the report by saying, quote, "We haven't seen any substantiation or received tips of phantom data centers constructed to deceive us and our partners, then deconstructed, smuggled, and reconstructed somewhere else. While such smuggling seems far-fetched, we pursue any tip we receive." This comes one day after U.S. authorities announced they shut down another China-linked smuggling network that attempted to smuggle more than $160 million worth of NVIDIA chips to China. It's important to note that this story has to do with NVIDIA's H100 and H200 GPUs, not Blackwell. And speaking of Blackwell, Reuters published an article today saying that NVIDIA has privately developed location verification technology. According to Reuters, this technology is a software option that customers could install. While the software was built to allow customers to track computing performance, it also provides a sense of the chip's location. According to NVIDIA, this customer-installed software agent leverages GPU telemetry to monitor fleet health, integrity, and inventory. This report is very interesting given all of the backdoor and security concerns that Chinese regulators had earlier this year regarding NVIDIA chips following the reversal of the H20 export control. It's also worth noting that this new software service appears to be a customer-installed agent, meaning that customers can choose to install it if they want to, but they may not be required to. Reuters says this feature has not been released yet, but it will be made available on NVIDIA's Blackwell chips. Regardless of what happens with the China situation, the good news is that NVIDIA's business is accelerating even without having any exposure to China, and that is what we should be focused on from the perspective of long-term investors. You may remember that I said repeatedly in recent weeks that if there was any opening for NVIDIA to sell in China, we would most likely see a notable move in the stock, and most analysts would promptly upgrade their NVIDIA price targets. So why has none of that happened? It's because there are still multiple unknowns about whether NVIDIA will be allowed to sell in China or not. The US greenlighting the sale of H200 is the first step in the process. The next question is whether or not Chinese regulators will allow the chips to be sold. We also have to see what happens with Congress, because a bipartisan group of senators recently introduced legislation that would block the sales of NVIDIA's Blackwell and H200 to China for 30 months. And then, even if both the US and Chinese governments approve of the sales, there are questions about H200 capacity at TSMC. Capacity is tight, and much of the H200 capacity has already been transitioned to other products. And so there are still a lot of unknowns in the short term. Now, as I said previously, if there's an opening for NVIDIA to sell in China, meaning that all of these issues get resolved, then at that point we would most likely see a notable move in the stock, and most analysts would promptly upgrade their price targets. Right now, many questions remain. But again, NVIDIA's business is growing strong even without China sales, and that is what we should be focusing on. In other news, NVIDIA-backed startup StarCloud has trained the first AI model in space using NVIDIA's H100. Data centers in space is such an interesting concept, as we've briefly talked about in the past. And the concept has been getting a lot more attention recently. In space, companies have access to near infinite solar energy, and they also don't have to worry about access to water for cooling because of the vacuum of deep space. I think we're going to hear a lot about data centers in space over the coming years. Also, Oracle reported earnings today with EPS beating estimates and revenue coming in slightly below estimates. Oracle's remaining performance obligations grew to a massive $523 billion, which is up 438% year over year. In the earnings release, we got commentary from Oracle chairman and CTO Larry Ellison saying, quote, "We no longer think it is strategic for us to continue designing manufacturing and using our own chips in our cloud data centers. We are now committed to a policy of chip neutrality where we work closely with all our CPU and GPU suppliers. Of course, we will continue to buy the latest GPUs from NVIDIA, but we need to be prepared and able to deploy whatever chips our customers want to buy. There are going to be a lot of changes in AI technology over the next few years, and we must remain agile in response to those changes." The AI build-out continues. As I've discussed in previous videos, while there are similarities between this AI revolution and the dot-com bubble, there are also major fundamental differences. During the dot-com bubble, there was an overbuild of supply and a lack of demand. Today, it's the complete opposite. Today, we're seeing a lack of supply in the face of overwhelmingly strong demand. Now, will certain parts of the AI ecosystem eventually enter into bubble territory? Sure, some probably will. But that does not mean that NVIDIA is a bubble, and it does not mean that AI as a whole is a bubble. Will there eventually be an overbuild of capacity? Possibly at some point. But I honestly think we are at least a few years away from something like that happening if it happens at all. For right now, the world is severely compute constrained in the face of very strong AI demand, and that will likely continue over the next few years. We also have to consider that new use cases will be developed in the coming years, which will increase the demand for compute even further. I don't know what the stock will do in the short term, but I continue to be bullish on NVIDIA from a long-term perspective. I also continue to think that most analysts' long-term NVIDIA estimates are too low given what's ahead. Today, most analysts are hyper-focused on NVIDIA's data center business, especially the cloud service providers. But we have to consider that NVIDIA has many other large long-term growth opportunities in front of it that are in addition to their massive hyperscaler-driven data center business: sovereign AI, enterprise AI, many AI-native startups, quantum GPU, supercomputing, and physical AI. While I expect NVIDIA's data center business to continue growing strong, I think the long-term growth of some of NVIDIA's other business segments and customer segments are being overlooked today. As for physical AI, NVIDIA CFO recently said that physical AI addresses, quote, "a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity and the next leg of growth for NVIDIA." This is not getting enough attention, but I think it will get a lot of attention in 2026 and 2027. NVIDIA sells the hardware for the data centers where the models are trained. They offer Omniverse where the models are taught and tested. And NVIDIA also sells the hardware that allows on-device real-time inference through NVIDIA AGX, allowing robots to have intelligent interactions with the real world even when they are not connected to a data center. Notice that NVIDIA is taking a holistic platform approach to physical AI, and they're embedding themselves as the underlying foundation supporting all of it. Over 2 million developers are already building on the NVIDIA robotics stack, and this is not getting enough attention. I continue to think that most analysts' long-term NVIDIA estimates are too low given what's ahead. As for production ramps, Blackwell Ultra is ramping very quickly right now, leading to revenue growth acceleration. Rubin is on track to launch in 2026. Then we're expecting Rubin CPX at the end of 2026. Later on, we're expecting the launch of Rubin Ultra in 2027 and Feynman after that in 2028. We have a clear data center product roadmap stretching into 2028, and Jensen believes there will be $3 to $4 trillion of global AI factory build-out between now and 2030. That means Jensen is expecting growing AI demand and an expanding total addressable market underpinning all of this. I don't think we are anywhere near any type of bubble bursting type of event. With all of this in mind, I seriously think that NVIDIA still has plenty of runway ahead of it. And I think this company will be worth substantially more in future years than it is today. At least that's my view of the situation. Remember to stay calm in this market. Remember to maintain a long-term perspective and do not make any hasty or irrational decisions. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.